Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and Happy New Year, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, January 3rd, 2022. So I'll now call this meeting to order and bring us to our first item tonight, which is a capital improvements program joint meeting with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we are grateful to have with us the Planning and Zoning Commission here on the dais and in the chambers tonight. And with our staff discussion, it will be set for about 30 minutes with Finance and Business Operations Director Jennifer Rodenbeck. So Director Rodenbeck, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we're here to present the fiscal year 22 through 27 CIP, or Capital Improvements Program. Just a little bit about the CIP before we get started. The CIP is a planning document and doesn't authorize or fund projects. Funding of projects will be coordinated with the annual budget process. So again, the CIP is really a planning document, like I said. I know oftentimes people will be like, well, I saw it on the CIP, so doesn't that mean we're going to do it? And you have to kind of remember it kind of changes every year, and we update it. We're trying to do projections for 5 years. So again, it is a planning document. You'll see on the CIP that there's just a little over 200 projects for about $358 million. So again, it covers a lot of areas and a lot of projects. And it's about 50 different funding sources. So you'll see in the back of the CIP, or actually on the CIP, a lot of acronyms, for local option sales tax, street construction funds, sewer funds, and there's over 50 different funding sources. So one of the things that staff's doing as we're developing the CIP is just like goal setting, CIP for us is really just another step in the budget process. And one of the things we're doing when we develop it is making sure we're incorporating city council goals into the CIP. So, there's obviously a lot of infrastructure projects, sewer, streets, stormwater, but things that were discussed at goal setting that we have in here as well is what are the projects funded by emergency reserve dollars? What's a private donation goals that we talked about? What's going to be our funding requests from gaming? We also say that any capital projects funded by user fees, so that's sewer, stormwater, refuse, that those have to be incorporated into those fees. We also want to do our base general obligation funding is on replacement debt. So as we're paying debt off, we don't want to sell any more than what we're paying off. And we want to make sure and protect at least 25 to 30% of our debt capacity. And for those of you who may not know, so what the debt capacity is, it is a percentage, 5% of the total assessed value in the city. And you'll see later in the presentation how much of our debt capacity we're using. So one other thing that sometimes comes up about the CIP is we talk a lot about infrastructure projects, but there's also the discussion about quality of life projects. So in that CIP, you'll see about 30 million is what we might consider quality of life projects. That may seem like a really small percentage on the CIP, but you have to also remember that quality of life projects tended to have to be funded by property taxes, general funds, hotel motel tax, donations, grants, so they're kind of sometimes the tougher things to fund versus like we talked about sewer and stormwater or things that paid out of local option sales tax or road use taxes. So one of the things that, obviously not going to go through all 200 projects, but just wanted to highlight a few projects, and I kind of split them up into some different categories. So I just want to talk a little bit about technology, want to talk about quality of life, a couple big projects under there, street, stormwater, and sewer. So we'll just start with technology. There's actually a handful of items on the CIP that are going to be tech related. The biggest one is number 23, the new financial system. We have had a financial system for a long time. And it's one of those things we've been talking about for the past few years. When are we going to replace our legacy system? It's been a long time coming. So one of the things that we're doing right now is instead of just jumping right into an RFP and going out for proposals on a new financial system, we decided to go through an assessment phase. And some of that assessment phase was, how do we look at our current operations? Is there a better way to do it? And then go from there in terms of what do we want to include in a request for a proposal. So this actually could be various projects on the CIP, because you'll see there's things in there about a permitting system, a capital asset system. Those might just be incorporated all into this, but again, that's what we're kind of trying to figure out through the assessment phase. Other technology things that you'll see is that we're actually getting ready to start a web and mobile app redesign. That was on the work plan for IT, starting that in January. Other things that have just occurred over the last year are new imaging system, permitting for fire, new rec software, but one of the things also that obviously we talk about and concerned about always is cybersecurity as well. So those are things that are just kind of various things on the CIP. So quality of life projects, again, just a couple of the big ones. Projects that most of you have probably heard a lot of times, but again, when they're the biggest projects on the CIP, then of course we want to cover them. So the Cedar River recreational improvements, timing FY22 to FY24. The total cost of the project did increase on the CIP from last one to $5.2 million. And the biggest change in the funding sources, you'll see there's a combination of funding sources. We have our general obligation, our GO funding, private, gaming, our emergency reserve dollars, and then the other grants would have increased to $1.7 million. This is a result of us trying to get an EDA grant to hopefully proceed with the project as close as possible to the design. So that's the river project. Another big project, a lot of people have been talking about the community, is the new high school pool. So again, you'll see the timing on the CIP of FY25 and a total project cost of $16.4 million. You'll see the school's contribution is $8 million, private of $3.3, and then the city's funding of $5.1 million. And that's made up of whether it's rec CIP dollars, general obligation funds, or general fund savings. I know a lot of times at goal setting, we'll maybe talk about general fund savings and what that's going towards. So this would be an example of when we talk about using the backfill for a capital project or money that's left over at the end of the year and saving that for capital projects. This new pool is a good example of how we would do that. Moving on to street projects. So there's 21 projects on the CIP that either use road use tax or local option sales tax, and you'll see SCF and road use tax, kind of we talk about that interchangeably. Road use tax is the actual revenue that we're getting, but it's in our street construction fund. So sometimes that gets a little confusing when people are trying to find road use tax on the CIP. It's really listed under street construction fund. So you'll see we have 21 projects, a total of $59 million on the CIP. Good news is that unlike what was projected, we've actually had increases in our road use taxes and local option sales taxes. However, you'll see that when I just mentioned $59 million on the CIP, however, there's kind of continued greater need for projects and project costs being higher. So it is a challenge sometimes for road use tax and local option to balance these on the CIP. Again, even though we increase revenue, have lots of projects that we want to do. One of the things that's always on the CIP, and this is number 110 on the CIP, is our annual street repair program. So it is where we're using our local option sales tax dollars for resurfacing and reconstruction, and we're actually going to hear more about that tonight. So you'll see on the CIP that there's $23.2 million, but on that line item is also some GO and utility funding mixed in there too, because obviously if they're working on fixing a street, reconstructing it, they may be working on the utilities underneath as well. Um, 119 Main Street, again, a lot of these I know aren't new projects. You heard a lot about them or had some presentations on them, but again, the timing of 22 through 25 and a total project cost of $14.8 million. You'll see that there's a variety of funding sources on this project as well. So GO funding of $1.7 million, road use and loss funds of $5.3, grant funding of $2.9, some downtown TIF of $1 million, obviously some utility costs and stormwater, and then also $1.9 million is designated on the CIP from ARPA to use for some of the sewer and stormwater costs, so we will be using some of our ARPA funds for that. West 27th, number 130. So again, in conjunction with the new high school, so 6.8 million. Schools picking up 3.3 million out of that, but then the city's funding, as you'll see, is a combination of some general obligation funding, road use tax, and local option sales tax. Local option sales tax being the biggest one. Moving on to stormwater projects. So stormwater is also one that can kind of be a challenge when trying to balance the CIP. There's 11 projects on it, 4.2 million. We've had to use some GO money to help cover some of those stormwater projects. I know sometimes what's of interest is the alleys are listed on there, using some stormwater and road use tax funding. So I know that's one of the things as they put that alley line item on there. I think their hope is usually to do 2 or 3, whether it's hard surfaced alleys or a couple more permeable alleys as well. Just a reminder, obviously anything with stormwater and projects is going to affect stormwater rates. So you did approve a 4-year rate increase, and we're in our last year of that. So we'll actually be coming forward to council here soon to talk about stormwater rates and you know, what we want to propose for that. Just some stormwater type projects on there. Olive Street box culvert, again, timing FY22 to 23, and a funding of 1.7 million. You'll see the bulk of that funding is going to be coming from the College Hill TIF area. I think this is a project where, I think last year we talked about it too, that the theme of this project is kind of a mixture of infrastructure and quality of life. So even though this doesn't use stormwater funding, you know, we would consider that under the stormwater projects. Some other stormwater projects, we have a couple slope repairs, one at the Greenwood Cemetery. So you'll see 555,000, some of that funding from stormwater, some from GO funding. So this is going to repair a portion of the steep slope on the edge of the cemetery that's failed. Another slope repair is West Ridgewood Drive. Again, FY22 to FY23, project cost of $225,000. Again, split between GO, but primarily from stormwater. So again, another failure on West Ridgewood. Now to move on to the biggie, the sewer projects. So when you look at our total CIP, and obviously sewer is the one that's going to have the really big dollar amounts on there. So there's 20 projects on the CIP that use either sewer rental fund or sewer revenue bond. So we kind of interchangeably talk about those. Again, all of those would be affected by stormwater fees. That's where that source would come from. And of those 20 projects, there's 150 million on the CIP. Obviously, the largest is the nutrient reduction project that you've heard a lot about. Again, all these projects affect stormwater fees. So we just had the 3rd reading of the ordinance that passes a 5-year rate increase of 7% each year. We also on the CIP have designated ARPA funds to help offset the cost of this project. And like I mentioned, CIP and large bond sales always continue to have effect on sewer rates. So again, largest project as it relates to sewer is the nutrient reduction. So you'll see the timing on here, 24 through 27. Mainly going to be funded, 112 million by bond funding, sewer bonds. But we are going to use 4.6 million of our ARPA funding for that. Just to kind of talk a little bit about the financing part of it then is, one of the things we're always looking at, again, as we're balancing the CIP is how much is of general obligation or GO debt that we are selling. And we do try to sell every other year of replacement debt. And so this is what we have on there right now, about 3.8 million for 2022, 3.9 for 2024, and 3.6 for 2026. So kind of right at where we need to be for what we're selling for GO debt. And some people, I mentioned earlier about use of our GO debt limit. So you may recall early on I mentioned about reserving 25%, so of our GO capacity. You'll see when we take our current debt outstanding and then we add in the debt that I just mentioned, those 3 bond sales, you can see that we're still below even 10% of our debt capacity. So again, kind of pride ourselves on our low debt and use of debt capacity here at the city of Cedar Falls. One of the things we also look at is, because we are doing replacement debt, we're looking at, for that GO money, what's the effect on the CIP? Again, it's very low use of debt limit. And if you take all these bond sales on there and you spread them out on for a property tax increase, it shows a 2.33% increase over the whole 5-year period. So you can see 0.5% a year. So again, that's our target of trying to do that replacement debt. And also when we're doing that calculation, that assumes no increase in valuation. I mean, we're doing a very conservative calculation when we're doing that. So what's kind of the next steps in the process of the CIP? So overview tonight, and Mayor will get to kind of an overview tonight, but if people have questions after this over, whether it's about financing or if there's specific project costs, I know other staff are here to help answer those questions, but really always kind of just want to give that high overview of it. And then what we'll actually have is the formal public hearing on the January 18th council meeting. So that is where the public would have the opportunity to ask questions. Council can ask more questions that night too. Obviously between now and then, people can ask questions too, and we can answer those. And then if the CIP is approved on January 18th, then we would take the FY23 column and incorporate it in the budget. So as I mentioned earlier, again, the CIP is not authorizing the funding of those. That's really through the budget process. So that's kind of our next step. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you, Director Rodenbeck.
Yeah.
We had a few Planning and Zoning Commission members come in and a council member come in. Just to know that tonight is an open discussion. If you have questions, especially, it's kind of odd doing it from the gallery, but you have just as much right to ask questions as Planning and Zoning members sitting in the gallery as those up here. So don't be shy if you do have some comments or questions. With that, I'll turn it over to council for questions you might have for Director Rodenbeck. Councilor Harding?
Well, thank you for everything. A lot of stuff. Appreciate it. My question, it's going to outlay a little history of where we got to, and then a question more for council to discuss. At goal setting, I know we had discussed moving forward with more zoning, College Hill zoning specifically, and there were other council members that felt that we didn't want to move forward with that until we revisited downtown. And I respect the goal setting process and I respect that process. But one thing that concerns me is that based off that conversation, we've taken out the funding for the new zoning in College Hill. And that means that we have no placeholder for it. And we wouldn't be able to, let's say we revisit the downtown, which I'm willing to look at and revisit. Well, then for the next year and a half, essentially, we will have no bookmark for funding for looking at that. So my request is that we look at putting that funding back in as a placeholder, even if we're not directing staff to necessarily go forward with it. I really want to see that funding there because I want to show that we are going to go forward with it, even if it's a pause to look at some things that were concerning. Does that make sense?
I think number 54 is your placeholder. And so perhaps some of us were questioning whether 54 should be in there. 55? I thought it was 54. Yeah, mine says 54.
So that was a question for me too, to find that line item had been dropped for the year. My understanding from goal setting was we were going to put a pause on College Hill, which was totally fine. We worked through the downtown zoning questions, but I was surprised to see that it had been removed entirely as a budget item. So we can't, even if we do resolve the downtown items in the next year, so I'm certain that we will, we wouldn't then have the funding to move forward with any additional work on College Hill. And that's a concern for me. I would much rather have it in there and find out if we don't use it for the year than to block it out entirely and not even have the option then. Do I understand that about correct, Director Rodenbeck? Like that's what would the effect would be if it's not funded for FY '23?
Correct. Yep.
And that's what I meant, was I would like to see the funding in there just as a bookmark, revisit, because essentially, this fiscal year starts July 1st. So if we're planning for that fiscal year starting July 1st and we don't have any funding reserved for it at all, well, then we have to wait until another year from effectively a year and a half to even start looking at it because we won't have budgeted it. So,
So we
Question
wouldn't-
then.
Go ahead, Councilman
Oh.
Cruz.
My preliminary CIP must be different than what's in the packet because I'm using this and that's changed the numbering. But from what I see here, the comprehensive planning and zoning update had 150,000 for fiscal '22 and fiscal '23, 150.
Correct. And it was removed after goal setting. So you're right, this preliminary CIP you received at goal setting would be different than what was in
Okay.
the packet.
Well, I guess with the various components of the form-based zoning and the discussion we've had over the last 6 months, I'm not certain that it would go forward into the rest of the city. So not having it in there and we can add it, I mean, we fund all kinds of projects throughout the year. It doesn't have to be, and it's 100,000 on a scheme of a $30 million budget isn't that much. So I don't know why we would need a placeholder necessarily.
Other thoughts?
I'm okay with Councilman Harding's, I mean, I recall goal setting that we decided to pause. But I don't want it to appear, or in my role, I intend to revisit College Hill, and it's incredibly important to our city, I feel, to make sure that that is, that we move forward with that discussion. So looking forward to the next fiscal year, I think it might be a good idea to have that money earmarked in there.
And in the email today, College Hill Partnership, you might have seen it, sent forward a note kind of toward the end of the day that was very concerned about the loss of funding for that item. And I understand for Councilmember Cruz's point, we could always add it in after the fact if we want to. Council can basically like do anything as long as it's legal. But I do have some strong concerns about the optics for College Hill if it's not programmed in. I'd rather us find out that we don't use it for the year than to deprogram it entirely. And I'm concerned about the message that would send to College Hill then.
well,
It's in for FY '24, so, obviously, we're not going to be doing anything in '23 since that's already into '23.
We're not in.
Into July, I mean. It would go, July is our fiscal date, right?
Correct. So on July 1st this year would start our FY '23.
Correct.
So we're currently in FY '22. Right. But you're right, Ms. DeBoer, that, we only took the funding out for 1 year because we thought that's what we heard at goal setting was a pause. So it wasn't take out all the funding for all the years. It was just the upcoming year because, again, we thought we heard pause, not eliminate, pause. So,
I get it. My concern is that if we revisit downtown and we talk about it, we come to a consensus, we sort some things out, and then we just want to sit there, we figure it out by June, people are happy as can be, possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah. And then we're just going to sit there for a year because we didn't budget to continue moving forward.
$100,000 that we can pull out of some fund somewhere. The GO fund has millions in it, so it's not like it's lost.
When's the last time we've done that?
Well,
And it's not that easy. I don't know. I don't view that it as that easy to just pull out some money from somewhere. I'd rather have it bookmarked and not use it than to try to find it from somewhere, personally.
I have
If
a
it's so
question.
easy to pull out, then why can't we just have it in there now?
I have a question.
Sure.
You used the word pause. I think we also used the word moratorium on having any building going forward under the form-based zoning that was adopted that many people are unhappy with and want to look at it more closely. So I'm assuming pause and moratorium are the same thing.
I would say
That's the consensus that I got out of the goal setting.
I would see a pause as more of a philosophical change, where a moratorium would be far more of a legal change, like,
Either way, it's semantics, really. You could look at the Webster's definition of it if you'd like, but we, in our discussion of goal setting, felt that a moratorium was appropriate till we determine how we want to move forward with form-based zoning or conventional zoning, what parts of town, whether we want a zoning review board or traditional planning and zoning and all the different components that we talked about. So I don't see, I consider it a moratorium. If not, that's what I want it to be.
okay. I think that's I don't know, for the rest of, for council, I know we discussed a moratorium, but that would, for Mr. Rogers, that'd be a legal change, correct? Like, we would have to implement an ordinance or an action to say we are, actually institute a moratorium, where a pause is more just general direction for what sorts of things staff is going to focus on the next year.
I agree.
I have no recollection of moratorium being used. I have a recollection of what we would call a pause, that it just, we need to iron out what was talked about for downtown. We're going to pause before we tackle College Hill, is the conversation I recall.
And goal setting is a consensus work, it's essentially a work session similar to a work session where it's consensus driven to help staff know what to focus on. We're not actually changing the law or the ordinances or voting on anything. So it would have to legally be a pause on waiting to go forward with that. So, for the sake of conversation, because we could go back and forth, I guess I'd just put forth a motion to put back in the funding for fiscal year 23, the College Hill zoning money to be there as a placeholder. And then talk about downtown, and let's cruise on it. Let's move. And get going. That's my motion.
I second it.
So motion and second, and just for Mr. Rogers' sake, is there any concern about having the council direct staff with a motion at this point?
My understanding of this evening was sort of an introductory talk with council, but action on the CIP is upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Seems it'd be more appropriate to wait and amend the CIP when that comes up for formal consideration. I suppose that you could direct staff to bring back something different for consideration.
That was my intent, was to give staff a heads up so that we don't change the CIP the day of the CIP, so that because I'm assuming they would have to move stuff around if it passed and look at it. So we would be presented with something slightly different.
As opposed to do it on the fly.
Exactly. So,
I don't see a problem with that, Mayor.
Okay, I would be, have no issues at all if it's just a consensus, but it sounds like there might be enough difficulty hearing a consensus that it probably makes sense for that motion. So then this would be a council, a voice vote from council only. So have we gotten the second for it? No. So motion and seconded. And can you repeat the motion just so we have it?
So the motion would just be to bring back funding for the, I believe it's item 54, is that correct, Jen? Item 54 for the new zoning for fiscal year 23.
Okay. So does that make sense to council? Okay, so motion and seconded to bring that item 54 funding back into FY23 of $150,000 was what it looks like it was scheduled before. And that would draw it from item 50, or excuse me, FY27, correct? It looked like it all just been pushed back.
Actually, we had it in there, I believe, every year when we first proposed it. So
Okay.
we would
Alright.
just probably leave the 150 in there for FY '27
Okay.
at this point. Again, it's a planning document, so
Sure.
that year's out is fine.
Okay, so the motion is to bring back funding for FY23 for item 54 of $150,000. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, so see a show of hands for aye. 1, 2, 3. A show of hands for nay. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that does fail, and that is removed. As Director Rodenbeck mentioned, it doesn't necessarily drop it out, and as Councilmember Cruz alluded to, that funding could be added in if council desires, but the staff is not directed to add that item back into FY23. So with that, any other questions or comments?
I had a question on 56 and 61, both the same question, basically. Both of these items, shouldn't they be done by the developer instead of by the city?
What are they?
56 was for housing needs assessment, to pay for $35,000 for an assessment, and 61 was for sample plans for residential building types of 40,000. So it's 75,000, and it seems like it should be developer driven? Or does that help for the community development block grants?
As I say, I can have Stephanie or Karen come help, but I think some of this was driven, like the housing needs assessment, right? Was some of that driven out of the racial equity task force recommendations? So that was the housing needs assessment. The residential type, was that based on the form-based or well, I'll let you answer.
Part of adopting policy would also be what tools can we bring to help development move forward and the policies that we've adopted. So yes, it is linked to the zoning, that number 61, that we might be able to jumpstart some of the housing types that are in the code.
But wouldn't that be up to the developer as to what they want to build? I mean, so how does this help?
It is, there are other communities that have done some sample plans of what does this mean, which kind of helps get over the hump, if you will, of maybe not understanding what can be done with the new code. So since we saw other communities that have done that, we thought it might be a reasonable proposal.
Mr. Mayor. I haven't had a chance to get on the internet, but I would venture to say you could Google lots of residential plans for a lot of construction and not have to spend $40,000. I mean, that seems like an exorbitant amount of money for sample plans that you could go to Good Housekeeping, or I don't know where you could go, but there'd be plans. So I'm not in favor of spending or allocating $40,000 for a project like that.
Okay. So
Is that also true for that 56, the housing need assessment? How are they different? One is 40,000, one's 35,000.
Housing needs assessment can link back to how we may need or could encourage affordable housing. It is something that we've heard from some developers that look to do low, moderate income housing through state tax credits and other programs. Sometimes they are able to do that, but that is an essential tool in trying to bring forward those types of projects. So again, if we're looking at ways that we might be able to encourage affordable housing in Cedar Falls, it's a reasonable proposal.
Okay, other questions or comments from council or from
So, Mr.
planning
Mayor,
and
then,
zoning? Councilor Cruz? Let's, if I
check
could
if
hear
anybody
others
else wants
first,
to.
and then we'll come
Yeah.
back to you. So anyone else from planning and zoning or council this time? Okay, seeing none, Councilor Cruz.
So I guess then formality-wise, I'd like to make a motion to postpone the sample plans for residential building types, item 61, until fiscal year '24, or pause it, whatever you want to do.
Well, I want to make sure that staff has the direction, so is it to
Okay.
delay funding until? or-
Delay it till fiscal year '24.
Second,
And which item is that?
61.
61? Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to delay funding for item 61 from this current fiscal year to next fiscal year. Is there a second?
Yeah, I said second.
Motion seconded, open for further discussion?
So, Mayor, so would
Yes.
this delay that being done, or nothing would be done, or is there other sources for us to use to move forward with the housing, or,
This isn't on the housing assessment.
well, the assessment? Is there another way to fund it?
That's not what this is on. It's not on the housing needs assessment. This is on the sample residential building plans
Oh, okay,
that I think you could Google
yeah.
cottage courts and get all kinds of plans off the internet. We don't need to spend $40,000. And I guess the follow-up question is, who are we paying $40,000 to get this? Is it the consultant, or who are we getting this from?
Any of these, what we're trying to do is prepare it for the possibility of applying for a building permit. So you need architecturally stamped drawings in order to get a building permit. So that's what we would do, a request for proposals for most likely an architectural firm to put together housing types that we have identified in our code.
Now, we're mixing up the words housing types as in the housing needs assessment and sample plans. I'm zeroing in on sample plans, which are, like you say, architectural drawings. I don't see the need for that.
Yes, so I'm talking about number 61 when I say housing types, single-family housing is a type, duplex housing is a type, row
Right.
homes, that type of thing.
Right?
So essentially, this is a question, it's creating more or less a Rolodex for developers to say, if you want to develop this or this or this, these are what inspections we would need. It gives you more information as a developer.
It's how they could meet our local codes, not only building code, but the zoning code requirements, since the approach to setbacks and things have changed a little bit. It's a little different, so it kind of helps get images and examples out there that could be used.
So is the intent to provide just a template so that it's as little confusion as possible or issues as possible in the developmental phase?
Right, I guess I'll refer back to this as before my time, but Sears and Roebuck had bungalow homes that you could get out of catalog, and we're trying to provide a catalog of what we might be able to implement here. It's probably $40,000, probably not going to go that far, though, and we might get one or two types out of that and see how it goes and evaluate that and see if there's any future in doing more or not.
Is it possible to find out prior to the 18th what something like that would cost? Because what Councilor Cruz is saying is you could get it off the internet for a couple $100 maybe?
Maybe nothing.
Maybe nothing? You might be able to just download a free torrent site
But-
housing plan.
Didn't you just say it has to be stamped by an architect?
Yes.
And it also has to have all of our new rules on it. So I'm assuming that the architects, correct me if I'm wrong, would be reviewing the plans and making sure all of our codes and specifications on the zoning are within those plans.
Right.
Which is something we couldn't get off the internet.
Exactly.
Okay,
But
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Cruz.
we have, sample building plans would be something for a standardized half-acre lot, 1 acre lot, whatever it might be. We have irregular shaped properties in Cedar Falls. We develop in infill areas that we've got stormwater drainage issues. We've got a whole host of things. I don't think sample plans will be very relevant, and I don't think the city should spend $40,000 on something like this, that we don't have a cookie cutter community. I know in a planned community, and the one that always comes to my mind when we talk about that is Irving, California, where they started out with like 6,000 acres of almond orchards, and they started and planned a city, and everything was planned from the beginning. Then you could use sample plans, but you should have artistic license to design your own cottage court or your own unique features in a building. And if you're buying plans and telling a developer you've got to use these plans, they say, well, I don't want to use those plans, I want to modify this. Well, then it should go to planning and zoning in the parts of town that we still have planning and zoning. We're spending $40,000 here, or proposing to anyway, to cover just the form-based zoning area of town that we've changed to. And like I say, I'm postponing it to fiscal year '24. I'm not eliminating it, I'm just postponing it.
just a correction, I believe, but I could be wrong. I can see where you're coming from, and I could hold off on spending the money, but we're not telling developers they have to use these plans. These are just options for them to look at. They can still do whatever they want as long as it falls within the ordinance that we passed. Correct?
Correct.
But I still see your point as to possibly pausing the funding. I just don't want there to be information out there that saying that you have to do this when that's not what the intent was. The intent was to just help people, help developers, let them check some stuff out.
So seeing that we have the motion on the floor just to postpone funding, so it's not the question of whether or not it's valid or not, but whether we want to spend it in this next year. So that's the key point. I do see Bob Manning standing, and I believe that he, as a rep from the Home Builders Association, might have a few good words for us. I wouldn't want this to take up another 20 minutes, but if you might be able to interject, that might help with their decision on delaying or not, that would be helpful.
A few good words really puts me on the spot, Mayor.
Lots of bad words.
My name is Bob Manning. My address is 2908 West 3rd Street in Cedar Falls. Many of our builders have been very successful at building the medium size and the larger size home. Our community, some of these needs assessments, one or the other, will help determine what price range of houses we should be offering and help us locate places to do that. Right now, many of our builders and developers are shying away from that because they don't see that there's sufficient profit in building a house in those areas of town for the dollars that we're talking about. You know, an 1,150 square foot house is pretty small. 1,200 square foot house, you can get in a third bedroom, small as it is, maybe just a single bath. Could be detached double garage rather than attached triples. But those are some things that we see a big need in the marketplace. And many of our builders, developers don't want to do that because they're inundated with so much information out there that's in the world, and whether they Google it or try to find something, what I think that this would help a builder do is narrow down some of the options or the thoughts that he or she could have. I think that not doing this is going to encourage the larger builders to come to town, where our smaller builders that are building 8 to 10 to 12 houses a year, they need that kind of help. And that's going to pull the rug out from underneath them and make it more difficult to find someone that will build those type of homes.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask him a question?
Sure. Don't go away, Bob.
So Stephanie was saying that 40,000 is just maybe the tip of the iceberg on this catalog. Is there an idea on how much a full catalog would cost, or any idea on that, or is that a question for Steph?
Oh, it's a question for Steph.
Okay.
I'd also suggest that we're not developing attached housing, and I think I addressed that a few weeks ago perhaps, but we're not developing attached housing. That seems to be a big demand and very, very popular in our competing cities in Cedar Rapids, Marion, Des Moines, West Des Moines, Ankeny, and those places. And our population demographics are suggesting older buyers are wanting to do that stuff. Now, in Cedar Falls, we have the benefit of a very aggressive retirement community building those homes, and they're satisfying a big part of that need now. But we'd like to see them continue to do that and others be able to do it, to add some variety to what's out there.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
So it kind of sounds like it might be a good investment for a number of reasons to help our smaller developers to satisfy a need for affordable housing in our community that will provide a place for people to live and work here. So in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't sound like a large amount of money for the return that it's possibly going to get.
okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Before that, for some of the Planning and Zoning Commission members, I know you've got a lot of experience working through these types of questions. I certainly would welcome your input of the value of doing something like this, of making set plans for developers to limit risk or limit the need for additional design work. So I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you want to, this would be a good time to chime in if you'd like. Mr. Leeper.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of housing, but You're right, the custom, everything's going to be custom, you know, there's every lots are different. I think it's much less about a stamped set of drawings than it is probably a catalog of ideas about what might be possible. So the council can make the decision on that, but I don't think it's about providing someone necessarily a stamped set of drawings per se, for the reasons that you're talking about, for customization.
All right, so I do want to be sensitive to the time. We've got pavement management to talk about as well tonight. Do we have enough information or enough discussion about whether to postpone this funding from FY '23 to '24?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councilor Cruz.
While we were discussing, I Googled sample residential building plans, and I got quite the variety of things on here. Design America presents one-story house plans, over 125 popular house plans, $12.99. Build Your Custom Home for Dummies, $16.66. Another one, Ultimate Book of Home Plans, $14.99.
Okay.
I could keep on going here. They're all small home plans. The Big Book of Small Home Plans, $14.99. So I think postponing this a year to get more relevance to the topic and discussion is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, it's been motioned and seconded to have this line item postponed in item
61.
61 from FY '23 to '24 for $40,000. No further discussion. Then or for council, all in favor say aye for postponement.
Aye.
Aye.
Nays?
Nay.
Okay, so that does pass to postpone that item, as I heard from voice acclamation. So that item to staff is to request to have that moved for 61 from FY '23 to FY '24.
Can I ask one other quick question?
Sure, please.
On item 124, it said that the developer was supposed to pay a portion of it. Is that what the private $40,000 fund is? Is what the developer's share of it is?
Yes, on the very,
On the very, very bottom?
various intersection improvements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so you'll see that in the current year. Yep.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that the developer was paying their fair share, which I wanted to know if that was the 40. It sounds like it is.
Yep.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I may touch on one briefly, or two, actually two. We got downtown parking ramp study for $100,000. I got it at number 36, it may have changed. And then we got parking lot, downtown lot improvements for $300,000. If our parking ramp study identifies a parking lot that we just spent $300,000 on, or several, it seems like a waste of money to do one or the other. I think we should discuss that, and we can between now and the January 18th meeting, but for the interest of time, we can keep on rolling. But I don't think we need to spend $100,000 on a parking ramp study. I mean, we got enough information from the parking consultant study we did in 2019, and locations are somewhat limited anyway. I'd entertain a workshop on that as opposed to a study. Because $100,000 is a lot.
Mayor, can I just maybe address that
Please.
on the parking? So I think in goal setting, what we came out of their staff thinking is, what's kind of our next steps? And, you know, we talked about, is it forming some sort of committee, staff, you know, interested, whether it's business owners, whatever, downtown, to figure out what are our next steps. And we would agree with you in terms of doing a study. I don't know that we need to do another parking study. But we may need help with, that we talked about in goal setting, is if we decide to do a ramp, okay, then what kind of fee structure would we have to create in terms of, do you need to have a fee structure that's the whole downtown? Do you have to have it 2 blocks from a ramp? I mean, those are the things that we're gonna need some expertise help on. So we wanted to at least put a placeholder in there about studies related to a ramp, but I wouldn't call it a parking study necessarily. So I don't know that we're gonna spend that much. Again, it's a placeholder. Obviously, any kind of study in a contract would come back to council to be approved before we went ahead. But I think hearing your comment about the lot improvements, I think that's a good point. So I think probably staff sitting here as we talk about what lot improvements need to be done. If there's some that are critical to be done, we'll probably proceed ahead. If there's things that aren't, or we think there is a viable option that a ramp's can go on the lot, obviously we know we can,
Sure.
you know, wait to do those. So thank you for that.
For clarification there. Anything else? Okay, well, that would conclude item 1, and we'll look forward to seeing the final capital improvements document forward to City Council as a public hearing on the 18th, and that will be open again for amendment or discussion. Hopefully, we'll be able to address before then, because it does take some work to jigger around the numbers to make the math add up. So thank you very much for a great discussion tonight about it. I'm glad we were able to resolve some of those here early on. And with that, that was the only joint meeting part for Planning and Zoning Commission. So you're welcome to stay up at the dais for the second part, but you certainly are dismissed if you have other things to do tonight. I'll give a few moments for those of you who'd like to leave. Otherwise, we'll keep on trucking. So. Thanks for joining us tonight. All right, so now we have Mr. Wiki for the 2023 pavement management discussion. We had 50 minutes set aside for that. We're looking at about, I guess, about half an hour until we'd want to, or 35 minutes we'd want to reset for regular council. But if we need to go a little extra because of discussion, that's okay too. So, Mr. Wiki, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. And tonight I'll be presenting, along with Ben Claypool, our pavement and alley management program for design year 2023. First part of the presentation, I'm going to discuss the pavement management program, and then the second part of the presentation will focus on the alley management program. Just to kind of get everybody up to speed and recap, our pavement management program system really started with the 1991 passing of the local option sales tax. And that's what funds these street reconstruction, our annual reconstruction project and street restoration projects. That was last voted on in 2016, and I believe it's set to expire in 2025, and that'll come to a revote at that time, hopefully to continue that project. Just to make clear, the money from that sales tax dollars goes into street repairs only. So there's different funding that's set aside for, you know, if there's sewer repairs that need to take place, or water main, that's different funding source than just the street repairs. As you can see on this slide here, since 1991, we've replaced about 44 miles in street reconstruction and about 107 miles of street restoration. And then there's another miscellaneous project of about 4 miles. That totals up to about 155 miles since implementation in 91, and that averages out right around $5 or 5 miles a year. So I'll just give you an idea of where that money goes and how it's used. Next slide. So this, just to kind of give you an overview of this slide here, shows you a map of what we have planned in the pavement management program for our street reconstructions for 2023. There is different highlighted areas on the map, with green being concrete reconstruction, and the blue color being the asphalt reconstruction, and red is asphalt restoration. But just for the purpose of this slide, we're highlighting the reconstruction streets. And you can see how those are distributed over the map. The two reconstruction streets, West 18th Street and Madison, those are concrete reconstructions. And that's estimated to cost about $1.9 million for those two street recons. And then Edge, Ridgewood Drive, and Woodland Drive are our two asphalt reconstruction streets. Those asphalt reconstruction streets are estimated at 1.2 million. All right, this map gets into our street restoration and kind of shows you the streets we have programmed for 2023, and is for our overlay, our asphalt overlay. As you can see, the distribution there of where we have those locations of street restoration. Now I'm going to get into kind of the individual streets. Our first street for reconstruction is West 18th Street. This is a minor arterial. It's 35 feet wide. There's parking on the south side, and there's a sidewalk on the south side. Stormwater, storm sewer, and water main are scheduled for replacement along this stretch of the street. And really what this is be a continuation from what is planned for 2022 street recon, where we have a portion of 18th Street in 2022. Just to note, the original concrete pavement on the street dates back to 1958, and it was last overlaid in 2001. So that was 22 years ago at the time that this gets reconstructed. So it's well past its service life. This just slide shows you the area of the recon from the limits of Campus Street to Clark Drive, and like I just previously mentioned, it's a continuation of the 2022 street recon. And then just finally, 2024 is scheduled to complete that section of 18th Street all the way out to Hudson Road. Next street we have for the concrete reconstruction is Madison Street from Bell Avenue to Virgil Street. This is a local street, and it's in pretty bad condition, as you can kind of gather from those photos. This is a 25-foot wide street with parking that's allowed on the south side of the street. The street is 25 feet wide, and continuing on with this street would be a continuation from our 2021 street recon project. The original street construction for this, the original concrete, dates back to 1941, and this was last overlaid in 1993, so that's 30 years ago, so well past its service life. And again, this just shows the limits of that street from Bell to Virgil, to give you an idea. And then again, continuing on in 2024, to complete this section of the street recon, we'd be going out to Victory Drive. Now we'll get into our asphalt reconstructions and just sort of recap. This is we have a 5-year plan for the North Cedar Heights area neighborhood. And this goes back to, a neighborhood meeting discussion we had with deteriorating streets up in that neighborhood, and what we could do to, rehabilitate these roads up in that area. And some of they're very narrow streets. They average 13 to 19 feet. There's no curbing on the street. There's very little stormwater control. So that contributes to some of the some erosion problems that we see up there. There is infiltration concerns in the sanitary sewer, and some of the goals that we'd want to try to bring to this reconstruction is to, realign the roadway to get it within the right of way. A lot of areas of this roadway kind of meanders in and out of the right of way. So what we'd like to do is realign that roadway to get it back within the right of way limits. Another thing is to get some curbing and some significant storm sewer improvements to kind of get that water directed to get into the storm sewer system, and so it's not just overflowing. This is, so for 2023, this is actually year 2 of the 5-year program. Year 1 is 2022, and that shows up on that map. The red is year 1, the yellow is year 2, and what this does is this continues our sort of our order of operations to get those streets that are northerly first, get those completed. That way we can then concentrate on the southern portion without disrupting the new pavement that's going to be up there on the north portion. In conjunction with, this is just a note, in conjunction with 2022 street repair, is that we have this, as Jen mentioned in her presentation, we have that slope repair on West Ridgewood, and that'll be done in conjunction with 2021. This just kind of gives you an idea of a cross-section of what we're looking at and some of the challenges that we face up in this area. Again, hopefully to try to curb at least one side of the street, direct that stormwater flow, try to target the width of the pavement to a consistent 18-foot width. Again, it's very narrow and windy right-of-ways up there. So, you know, it's difficult to squeeze a street in there. So we won't be able to get much more than 18 foot, but that's our target that we're shooting for. There's elevation changes, and then there's also our utility and utilities under the roadway that will need updated and replacement as needed. With the completion of this project, it will, you know, improve some of the snow removal and trash collection, and just overall the traversability of the roadway. Again, along with this 5-year program, is working in conjunction is the identification and elimination of some of our sanitary sewer infiltration and inflow. So that would be going on simultaneously with these street recon projects. All right, moving on to the individual streets. This is East Ridgewood Drive, and it's from Greenwood Avenue to Cherry Boulevard. And as you can see from the photos, the street's in really, really poor conditioning. You know, it's potholed, it's raveling, it's just really deteriorated. And to reiterate, this is for 2023 is year 2 of this 5-year plan. The street has an average width of about 14 feet. And again, we'd want to get to that target width of 18 feet. So, you know, we're looking at utility replacements and this would continue on from Cherry Boulevard all the way up to where it meets with West Ridgewood. This whole neighborhood, there's no sidewalk or curbs to speak of. Currently, what travelers have to do to pass each other is they would have to either utilize someone's driveway or look for a shoulder area that's adequate to be able to pass each other going head to head. Our records don't indicate when the original pavement was installed in this neighborhood, but what we do have records of was the last time it was really had any maintenance done to it was back in 1971. So extremely well past its service life, as you can tell in the photos. So that's a big need. And then again, just to kind of graphically show you the area that we're talking about here from Greenwood back up to Cherry Lane. And the idea is to continue the methodology of working from the furthest back and then working our way kind of to the south. The other asphalt reconstructed street in this neighborhood for 2023 is Woodlawn Drive, and that was just east of East Ridgewood Drive, and it goes to a dead end. Again, this is very poor conditions of the pavement. It averages about 15 foot wide. Again, that target would be to get it out to 18 foot wide. And then utilities on the roadway replaced as needed. And again, there's no sidewalk or curb to speak of. And just like East Ridgewood, this falls in line with last time it had any significant maintenance done to it. And then to show you again graphically on this slide where Wood Lawn is east of East Ridgewood and just goes to that dead end segment. Now to shift gears just a little bit, talk about our bicycle network. So our staff has been working with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, and what we've talked to them about and presented to the committee is the rationale for roadway widths and where sharrows are appropriate, when you can put dedicated bike lanes in a roadway, and what would need to happen. So the discussion on 18th Street in particular, I know that they was hoping to see if there was a possibility to get a bike lane, dedicated bike lane. But in order to do so, you know, you would have to eliminate the parking in order to accommodate that. And so this actually brings us back to utilizing sharrows on the roadway to maintain that parking. And this was previously approved by council back in 2021 for the entire 18th Street corridor. Other streets in this program they weren't identified by the committee, by the Bike and Ped Committee, as a target to have any additional biking accommodations added to them. So we're only talking about 18th Street here. And with that, that's my presentation for the street reconstructions. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he's going to walk you through the street restorations and that alleys.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wiggy. Mr. Claypool?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Looking at this slide, you can see all of the planned 2023 restoration streets. Starting with Grand Boulevard would be a mill and overlay. This is from Timber Drive to Galloway Avenue, kind of a dogleg up in that corner. Just as a refresher, or if you're not familiar, I know some of the council is new as well. With our mill and overlay, we would typically see that on either a composite pavement, which is concrete with an asphalt surface, or full depth asphalt pavement. Remove about 3 inches of that surface and then place 3 new inches of asphalt back on top. That gives us a new wearing surface and then are able to extend the surface life of that road. That's the general process with the mill and overlay, and then that also allows you to, if you still have reasonably good curb, you still have that curb height capacity with that replaced asphalt. The next streets would be Laurel Circle and Linden Avenue. Laurel Circle is east off of Hudson, and Linden Avenue is west off of Hudson. We'd be targeting those with just a standard 3-inch asphalt overlay. Next is Lone Tree Road, another standard overlay from Ford Road to Hiawatha Road up in North Cedar. Then Nordic Drive from the dead end to past the Westminster intersection, another standard overlay. And then Green Hill Road from Hudson Road east to Ashworth Drive. We would be targeting a saw and seal overlay. With the saw and seal overlays, after the overlay is placed, we have the contractor then immediately saw cut all of the existing concrete joints, and that takes where the known stresses on the pavement would be, and it is able to reduce some of that significant maintenance and sealing that you need to do very shortly after if you do not do the saw and seal. Cedar Falls has been relying on that method for our minor and major arterial roadways for a while. We've seen it on Hudson, and it's proven very effective, with Green Hill Road being the same situation. That's why we'd be targeting the saw and seal overlay. Now moving forward, I'll present the 24, 25, and 26 pavement management as a whole, and I'll try to keep it brief. Looking on the left-hand side, you can see the reconstruction for 24. We have Lorinda Drive, Madison Street. That would be phase 2 of 2, starting in 2023. West 18th Street is that continuation David discussed between Hudson and the Western construction limits. And then Edwards Avenue and Greenwood Avenue would constitute phase 3 of that North Cedar Heights area reconstruction. For restoration, we would have the small segment of Eric Road off of Hudson to the west. Hawthorne Drive would be phase 1 of 2. This would be the segment of Hawthorne west of Round Street as you're coming off the one-way traffic south of Cedar Heights Elementary School. A lot of traffic continues on Hawthorne, and that segment of roadway needs some restorative efforts to continue its service life. We have Ridgeway Avenue on the south side of town, River Ridge Road, and Sands Avenue as well. In 2025 for reconstruction, we'd have Lakeshore Drive, McLean Drive, which would actually be the continuation of McLean North from this 2021 reconstruction year up to University Avenue. Olive Street would continue south from where it left off 6th Street here in 2021 as well, and go to 9th. Veralta Drive, and then followed up with Greenwood Avenue and Cherry Lane, continuing phase 4 of the North Cedar Heights reconstruction efforts. For restoration, we would have phase 1 of 4 for Lincoln Street. That would be from the northern segment of Main Street here to the east city limits. This would be that first westernmost section, followed with Wynwood Drive, Hawthorne Drive. That would be the phase 2 there, Autumn Ridge and Green Creek Road. And then in 2026, the continuation of Olive Street to the south, and then Oakland Avenue, Picturesque Drive, and West Ridgewood Drive would be the 5th and final phase of that North Cedar Heights reconstruction efforts. For restoration, Nordic Drive, the next phase of Lincoln Street, Pleasant Drive, Pheasant Drive, Pleasant Drive, and Bicentennial Drive. And then resuming from, these slides were new to council last year, but engineering department thought it'd be a good refresher or introduction to the new council members as well. I'll try to remain brief. Cedar Falls has 166 alleys, mostly located in the original gridded section of the town. 129 of them are gravel. You can see the remaining numbers of the asphalt, permeable, and concrete types. Overall, the alleys are in okay condition, but we're starting to see a significant number of those in a critical condition where we've needed to start addressing them more effectively and just in a slightly faster quantity to keep up with them, leading to kind of a reprisal of the alley management program starting in 2021. Back in 2015, there was an alley-wide assessment to determine what alley conditions there were and to start focusing on reconstruction efforts. We had put in our first permeable alley in 2014. We'd seen a number of them up until, up through current time, and as well as doing a number of commercial and needed alleys with concrete in the downtown area and elsewhere in town. In 2018, the permeable alley improvement locations map was effectively created, and that was to start placing more permeable alleys as we could target some additional funds and see the benefits of the stormwater improvement to the area. Starting in 2021, efforts were kind of realigned with the target of constructing 2 to 3 permeable alleys a year with 1 to 2 commercial or priority alleys a year, additional in concrete. For the commercial, that'd be the downtown area or the College Hill area. There's a lot fewer alleys in the College Hill area. And then the priority alleys would be alleys that need immediate correction per our operations and maintenance division that we need to get hard surface to stop causing all the required maintenance. The kind of approach to that was a 2-step segment. First, looking at all the alleys and identifying whether or not they should be reconstructed. That takes us a look at a number of questions. Are there known concerns with the alley? Is there trash pickup? How long has it been? How old is the alley? And seeing a lot more on our end, how often does operations and maintenance have to perform maintenance? Do they have to go out and regrade it? Do they have to scoop gravel off the road? Are people having a hard time just driving on the alley. Obviously, the more yes or the more frequent that is, would make the alley a higher target on the reconstruction effort. And then step 2 would be taking the other look at it as, okay, if it does need reconstructed, should it be permeable or should it just be hard surface? And when you look at those, the first question's kind of on its own. Is the alley located in a critical watershed? I'll go more into that on the next slide, but that helps determine possible grant funding and where the impact of stormwater improvement would be most noticed. And then the next 3 are more geometric or logistic based. Is the alley actually sloped enough that if it collects water, can it drain into the local or into the adjacent city storm sewer? Followed by, is there actually city storm sewer next to it that it can be tied into? And then how much of the alley drains into that? If we have storm sewer right next to it and it slopes, but it's on the uphill side, that negates the alley from benefiting from becoming permeable. For the watersheds I discussed, with the Iowa DNR and IDALS, there are grants available if they're in the 2 critical watersheds in our community. That'd be the Jennings and College Square. You can see the outline there on the map. We have recently, there are 13 alleys in that area. We have recently discovered with our watershed coordinator that if our storm sewer also connects into those areas, we are possibly able to seek funding. So that's opened up some additional grant possibilities on those alleys. Recently, those grants locally have been going to different wetland restoration across the state, but our local coordinator is very active and able to help us pursue some of those funds. For 2023, this is the list of the 5 alleys that we have planned. You can see the alley between 2nd and 3rd, Main and State, as well as 13th and 14th, Franklin and Clay would be the concrete alleys or non-permeable. The one downtown would just be the continuation of the downtown paving, and the one lower between 13th and 14th is a frequent public works maintenance required one. The other 3 are permeable candidates, and all of these years of construction are slated to be approximately $300,000 in costs, with about $85,000 out of stormwater fund and the rest supplemented by the street construction fund. As we go on with 2024, you can see the additional ones, another downtown alley, and then a short stub off of Waterloo Road as the public works priority, and then the 3 other permeable alleys, either continuing the chain on where they're connected to storm sewer or servicing the most effectively. 2025, a 3rd downtown alley, and then another one much further south in town, closer to the college, would be concrete. And then the 3 permeable alleys, all in need, can be clustered off the corner. That would help make it hopefully a little more cost effective for the contractor and a little cheaper on city cost, with that work being closely clustered. And then lastly, with 2026, one more of the downtown alleys, and then a public works priority between 16th and 16th and 17th Street, Franklin and Clay, with the 3 other permeable alleys continuing those efforts off of, or to the east side of Main Street. That general area appears to be strongly improved by our permeable alleys, and we're hoping to address some of those. I'll leave it on this slide off to David to wrap up the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cleveland.
Okay, so what staff is recommending tonight is the approval of the 2023 pavement and alley management plans. And what this allows staff to do is to continue on with the final design of both those projects for 2023. And with that, we'll entertain any questions you might have.
Okay, so, well, for Mr. Wiki, any questions for him from council? Mr. Cruz?
I'm not sure, David, if you were here. It was a couple years ago, we had a workshop discussing North Cedar and drainage issues with snow melt coming from the north and west. And we were looking at a very likely need of upsizing our storm sewer dramatically. And I know Mr. Gaines gave us a pretty good presentation, and I don't know where we're at with that and in relation to what you're showing us here, because if we go from no curbing to curbing, we're going to funnel in the snow melt into a storm sewer that may not be big enough. How's that being addressed, or what you know, different parts of town have different sized storm sewers up there in
Right.
North Cedar, so.
Now, that's all part of our evaluation and sizing the storm sewer, because we take those into consideration and look at those.
Maybe it'll help out a little bit with this, but what Mr. Cruz is referencing is in the North Cedar area and upsizing of storm sewer, and that is programmed in the CIP. I don't have it in front of me, but it's in one of the later years, I believe 2026. The presentation tonight was on the North Cedar Heights area. I want to make sure you're not getting confused, but that's off of Rainbow Drive and Grand.
Okay. Another quick comment, if I may, if anybody else. The bike lane on 18th Street going with Sharrows, was there any discussion on just going to 19th Street? Because looking at the map, they're parallel, similar topography. It'd be quite easy to have a bike trail on 19th instead of on 18th. That's quite busy. I think that would be a good discussion to have.
So that was not brought up by the Bike Ped Committee. They didn't have a desire for 19th Street at that time, but it's something we can discuss with them.
Right, I mean, if their desire was to have a bike lane, a dedicated bike lane, and we chose not to do that for a variety of reasons, then an option for them could be 19th Street, and they should pursue that in the discussion. And that's all I have, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, discussion?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Gil Schultz.
On the overlay from Ford to Hiawatha on Lone Tree, what's the decision between overlay and reconstruction? Because it's set for overlay, correct?
Correct. So the general criteria determining whether we do a full concrete reconstruction versus the overlay is we have to look at several different factors. We look at the age of the pavement, when it was last overlaid, if it was ever overlaid, and basically the age and the rate of deterioration to determine, you know, what kind of condition that pavement's really in. If it's an existing street that has, you know, we're looking to extend the life of that pavement, and it doesn't have a whole lot of deteriorated conditions to it, then we will look to overlay that street. Conversely, if it's been overlaid once 20 years ago and it's got a concrete base under it and it's just really falling apart, you know, then we'll determine, that's when we determine, all right, this really, you can't overlay it again, it wouldn't do you any good. We really need to look at reconstruction.
And a big part of I guess part of my question is with the new construction or the construction is you upgrade the utilities at that same time typically, or is that as needed?
As required.
Okay.
Mr.
Other
Mayor.
questions? Yes, Councilmember Cyrus.
Mr. Wiki, can you just tell me how much the total amount is for the alleys that we're going to do in this next year? Just the alleys by themselves, how much money we're going to spend?
You got the budget number? Let Ben answer that.
Sorry, if I can interject, yes. For the specific year, I have the number here. For 2023 right now, we have estimated at $310,000. For 2022, we'll be bringing the plans to council shortly. There was actually one alley pulled off of 2021 plans. That alley was transferred to 2022, so that cost will be a little higher, but on average, we are trying to target right at $300,000.
And that will do how many alleys?
That allows us to do the 2 concrete, and then 3 permeable approximately.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, then, could we see the motion again, Jeremy? That one
Motion to
slide.
approve the 2023 permeable and alley
the-
management
Second.
plans.
The motion and seconded, any final discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that does pass, and thank you very much, Mr. Weeke, for the discussion, and Mr. Claypool for the great work as well. So with that, that concludes our item right on time. So we will look to reconvene at 7 o'clock for Committee of the Whole, or excuse me, for regular council meeting, and until then, we are adjourned. Thank you.